Hello, I'm going to start reading. Chapter 9, The Acts of the Apostles. 9.1 Acts and the New Testament Canon. The book of Acts is unique in the New Testament on several counts, and its importance is largely linked to that singularity. Most obviously, Acts is distinctive because it represents the only historical narrative of events involving Jesus' followers after the resurrection and first appearances of Jesus. Among the evangelists, Luke alone has related for us a series of accounts that takes its point of departure from the end of Jesus' ministry. Thus, he alone indicates in such a profound way the continuity between the story of Jesus and the story of the early church. In chapter 6, we have seen that the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles are characterized by unity at several levels, including authorship, theology, and narrative development. The most glaring sign of this unity between these two is their canonical location. Already in the 2nd century, Luke's Gospel came to circulate with the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and John together, forming the fourfold Gospel canon. The Gospel of Luke, it was thought, could be read best in concert with other narratives of the life and ministry of Jesus rather than in conjunction with its original companion volume. Luke's story of Jesus was first sundered from his account of the early church, which then found its home in relation to the New Testament letters, especially those written by Paul. Finally located between the Gospels and the collections of letters in the New Testament, Acts serves three immediate functions in the biblical canon. First, it provides a bridge from Jesus to the church, showing how the movement initiated by and surrounding Jesus in Palestine developed into communities of believers spread throughout the Roman Empire. This bridge is more than a structural convenience that draws together the two collections, Gospels and letters, however. Second, the placement of Acts in the canon fosters a certain theological perspective from which to read the rest of the New Testament, for it countenances the spread of the good news to the Gentiles throughout the world and sanctions the work of particular witnesses, including Peter, James, and especially Paul. Third, the chronology of the narrative in Acts provides an outline on which to hang people, places, and events mentioned explicitly and presupposed in the New Testament letters. Without Luke's historical narrative, we would be hard-pressed to understand the chronology and progression of the Pauline mission, for example, and we would appreciate less fully the role of Peter, the apostle, and James, the brother of Jesus, in the earliest days of the Christian movement. The position of Acts in the New Testament canon. Although including the Acts of the Apostles in the canon constituted no great problem in the early centuries of the Church, the question where to locate the book apparently attracted different responses. In the end, Acts played the crucial role of linking the collection of Gospels and collection of Pauline epistles. The following list of New Testament books illustrates the mobility of Acts. 9.2 The Book of Acts as History. The traditional role of Acts in filling in the details of early Christian history raises immediately a series of questions for students of Acts. The most important has to do with the historical veracity or trustworthiness of Acts. Can the narrative of Acts bear the weight of historical reconstructions we might want to place on it? Can we trust it to tell us what actually happened, both in matters of detail and in its grand portrayal of the progress of the early church? Pessimistic responses to questions of this nature have led many interpreters in the past century to reject the identification of Luke's work with the ancient practice of historiography or history writing. Some prefer to call Acts an example of the ancient novel, designed above all for entertainment, or to think of it primarily in biographical terms. This way of thinking about the nature of Luke's second volume is problematic on various grounds. For example, in his 2nd century treatise on how to write history, Lucian advised historians to give their audiences what would interest and instruct them, indicating thereby that even historiography need not be lacking in aesthetic qualities. What is more, we would be wrong to imagine that failure to do a good job as a historian would require that one be classified as something other than a historian. If we were to find, for example, that Acts is a poor example of historiography on grounds of historical trustworthiness, this would not be sufficient ground to require that we read it according to the rules of some other genre. Choice of genre and quality of performance are separate issues. Having said this, though, the question remains, how does Acts fare with regard to historical veracity? How one asks this question is important, since the rules of historical writing have changed in the centuries since Luke's day and continue to change today. Our reference earlier to what actually happened is actually a misnomer, since it sets a standard for historiography that can never be met, not by acts nor by any other historical narrative. Since the 19th century, many of us in the West have been taught to expect from historians a kind of investigative work concerned with just the facts. The truth is, none of us could write or be expected to read what actually happened, since such a report will require an all-knowing perspective and would be so full of unnecessary and unwanted details as to be impossibly unwieldy. Historians are not interested in what really happened, but in what they and their communities deem to be significant among the many events that might have been recorded and in the relationships among the events that are recounted. We recognize today that every statement in the historical work has both a documentary and an interpretive force. This means that the older bias against the historian who acts also as a theologian has little to support it. Thus, the central problem on which the debate on the historian has typically turned has had much less to do with the nature of acts than with modern problematic conceptions of the historian's enterprise. The view of the last 2 centuries that historical inquiry is interested above all in establishing that certain events took place and in objectively reporting those facts has been eclipsed by a conception of the historiographical project in which Luke would have actually found himself more at home. The primary question is not how the past can be accurately captured or what methods will allow the recovery of what actually happened. For it is increasingly acknowledged that the historical narration of events is always tied to interpretive commitments. Historiography imposes significance on the past, both by its choice of events to record and to order, and by its inherent efforts to postulate for those events an end and or origin. Events are woven by historians into chains of causation, with the result that our interest in reading should fall less on validation and more on signification. The primary issue becomes how the past is represented.